And we are live to our weekly edition of the Art of Creative Commerce. And today, for episode 7, we're bringing it to you a little differently this week. We are going to kick off the series like we always do, except we are going to host on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. And you're going to see Austin and I. You're going to see a little bit more of us, a little bit more dialogue, and we're going to get right to our topics. So remember, we are going live using StreamYard, so please give StreamYard access to see your name. So if we share your comments, we also see your name. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. It is not a two-way conversation between Austin and I. It is open for everyone. We want to hear your thoughts, especially about today's topic all around price modeling. It's a good one, so we want to hear what you're thinking. Austin, over to you.
All right. Yeah, price modeling is such an important thing, and it is really fun to join you guys every Tuesday. I hope we can keep this baby up with some special guests as well as Mahoganey and I. That'll also be a continual thing where we have additional people that are speaking with us. So that's very fun. In addition to that, today we're just going to explore kind of one of the final chapters of the basics of building your business, and that is pricing, price modeling. Now, one thing we want to talk about very first and foremost is really that we're calling it price modeling, which might seem weird to you. But in the United States, where I'm based in California, calling it price modeling is important because price fixing is a very scary thing that you don't want to go to jail for. You don't want to survive this COVID crisis just to go to federal prison. So you want to be very careful that you do not ever meet with a competitor or some market competitor of yours and discuss standardizing pricing for any industry. That's basically what price fixing is in a nutshell. That's pretty close to the Wikipedia definition of it. So if you want to research that more, talk to an attorney. But I promise you that any attorney and financial advisor will be very, very scared of price fixing. So again, price modeling, we're going to talk about best practices, what we've heard on the street, what we might do in our own companies. But we're not suggesting that you guys hit any benchmark of price standardization, which there shouldn't be anyway, because based on the region that you work in, based on the demographic of your client, based off of the threshold of relationship and involvement that you might have with the organization, that could change your hourly rates, that could change your fixed fees, that could change a lot of things about how maybe sliding scale pricing that you might come in versus a vendor that's in the middle of the country versus a hot region like Los Angeles, which has premium tier pricing, New York, premium tier pricing. But labor is more expensive, trucking is more expensive. So be cautious about even reaching out to a competitor or a friend of yours to talk about what pricing works for them, because there's a lot of regional factors that are situational factors that come into factoring prices. So Canadian perspective on this, Mahoganey, talk about price fixing, the dangers of, and also why we don't want to talk about price fixing. We want to talk about price modeling today.
So to be fair, I feel like in Canada, we're a little bit more apprehensive when it comes to sharing our pricing models and our structures. It's actually been a hot topic for the Canadian Society of Event Professionals, because we've had closed door sessions where it has gone to full-on arguments about the value that we bring to the industry. So we're not talking about price fixing, and we're not saying that everyone should actually price exactly the same, but what we're saying is that it should be some sort of standard. We're not
best practices, if you will.
Best practices.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, so we're pretty much aligned, and I think that you guys probably are as well too. Even if you're growing your business or if you're merging from a corporate career, you all must understand already that pricing and price structures from a basic outline. But we're going to talk about some of those margins that get lost. And there's a lot of things that in the first, let's say, 5 years of my business, we did not employ. And now we do, and it's standard practice. As soon as you hit 7 to 8 figures of income per year, you're going to realize that those margin errors, as well as when you leave money in the margins to the tune of 0.5% or 1%, start amounting to pretty big figures of money. So you start looking for those things as you scale your businesses. But certainly, if you want to find some waste right now, no matter how big of a company you are, if you're doing $50,000 a year or $100,000 a year on the smaller scale of a business, right? It's still important that you grab onto those monies, because right now, 3% at $100,000 a year, that's $3,000 that you're just leaving on the table. Or it's $3,000 you can spend on building your brand or take the family on a vacation. So I think those things are important. And the bigger you get, the more important they're going to be. So let's kind of jump into the very first and foremost. Mahoganey, anything else you want to add on the front end?
No, I just want to say it's time to reclaim our worth. I know it's a hard time, but we are going to have this conversation truth be told, Austin and I did talk about this, and that if you don't have a pricing model already in place, then why are you in business? But we're gonna walk you through it.
She ain't wrong. So let's just jump right in there. Let's talk about service-based pricing. So for those of us that are a hotel, convention center, or those of us that are not a visual company, or those of you who is a large audience are planners, principal planners, let's call it, right? Creating that service base. What is that core service base? And that core service offering can be simply you. It can be, a minimum buy-off in hours of how long it takes you to consult, plan, design, engineer, engage with negotiations, conversations, contracts, all that stuff that goes along with an event, convention, trade show, whatever you want to do. You're service-based, because no one's going to just, or maybe I'm wrong here, many people wouldn't spit out just a simple hourly rate and work off of the client's vision of how long they think it takes to do a job. You usually want to say, for $5,000, that's broken down about 40 hours at X amount of dollars per hour, right? You want to kind of clearly present that pricing up front. So make sure that you present a pricing model that has clear inclusions and exclusions. So again, when you figure out what your core service offering is going to be, making sure that you identify in some narrative form as well as some legal form to protect you the inclusions and exclusions of that agreement, right? Again, if your base threshold is going to be $5,000, $10,000 maybe to touch a job, make that very clear, but also make it very clear how you want to justify that. Because if a client adds 8 breakout rooms and now you've got to coordinate 8 obviously smaller contracts, there's still more time spent. So make sure that you have a justifiable means of how you got to that $5,000 or $10,000 threshold, because that's going to be an essential tool for you to justify yourself, as well as create a model of fairness so that you can't get taken, but likewise your client feels like they can't get taken because everything's out on, cards are on the table at that point. Mahoganey, with respect to pricing a service base and a core service model, what feelings do you have about just the initial pricing of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with the base price for before you even touch a job. Right. What you will go in with, what you won't go in with, so that it helps you to price from there. I mean, we'll talk about a little bit more about what that looks like and what that hourly rate should be, but really having a firm understanding of your entry point is a huge, and it was a game changer for me as well. I opened.
No doubt. So in figuring that, big rule of thumb here is if you cannot break it down, rethink it all together. And I'll give you guys an example of a recent thing that I just had with a client. So a client brought us in to kind of review their marketing strategies. And a large part of their spend was what we were doing, but we knew the client very, very well. In knowing that client, they had us review a service provider's contract. And I reached out to the firm, and they were an agency. And I said, okay, I understand that you've increased your monthly level of service from, I think it was a $3,000 a month retainer to $5,000 a month retainer. That was perpetual, so it's quite a bit of money. It's talking about $36,000 on an annual basis compared to $60,000 per year. So it's about double. And so I asked the female who ran the firm, and I said, totally fine. I'm fine by playing by the new rules of your new threshold has increased, not a problem. Just let me know what that gets me. And so she broke it all down. And in her breakdown, she got to $3,200. She couldn't justify the last $1,800. So I said, okay, get back to me with the full itemized. She broke it down, and she just put an $1,800 charge to represent her new minimum. Now, I'm sorry, it didn't sit right with me. So we recommended to our client, we go with another firm, and for $500 more per month, my client is now spending $5,500 a month as opposed to her $5,000, and they're actually getting twice the amount of service out of a firm because they, one, didn't know what they had, and two, this unfortunate other firm, she couldn't present her model to me in a reasonable way of basically I spend 4 hours on this task, 8 hours in that task, 12 hours in this task per month. She couldn't justify her own figure. Don't be caught in that because one, it's unfair, and two, you're basically admitting to stealing from a client, and three, why? Like, tell me why, especially in a very tight economy. Now, this negotiation with her happened pre-COVID, so I feel bad for her now. I'm sure it's only gotten worse, but think about that now. People are going to be looking at every dollar they're going to allocate to a project. And I think that largely, and people would argue about this fact, is that people are okay still spending a lot of money. I still have a lot of clients who might not be spending money right now, but when we come back, they're not going to want a discount. They don't want me to do it cheaper. They just want to justify how we got there. Right? So again, if you cannot break it down, rethink the strategy behind how you bill your clients, in my opinion. And also too, I have found myself in a world of freaking hurt by doing a lot of free work, because when you paraphrase things like, we will plan your event flawlessly or something like that. And the client moves venues, or I've had clients that rethink their thematics and layouts 7 times. You've now designed 7 events. But if you're not clear about what the parameters are of your engagement on what you're willing to do for how much money, and then you will build prevailing rate if things go beyond 3 floor plan revisions, 2 mood and tone boards, whatever it might be, but outline the parameters for how you, because wow, some of your clients, especially the ones that you start your business with, those are your friends that you've known long enough, working rapport. When you start working with new clients and strangers, basically, it's a whole new world because they might have worked with vendors that work entirely oppositely of you, or they don't trust you. And quite honestly, I couldn't blame them for not trusting you because I don't know you. So to justify that and to create a baseline of fairness that's a through point where you're seeing eye to eye right here, you need to create a model that allows them and you to audit one another and fairly bill and fairly be compensated for your time and experience, right? Everyone says, right, it takes a half hour to do the job, but it took me 10 years to do it in a half hour, and you're paying me for the experience of how to do it in a half hour. I firmly believe in that. So I don't believe in discounting yourself, but just make sure that you can get to that point in justifying the time spent and how much you're going to spend on that. Mahoganey, that was pretty beefy, and that's really the core of this conversation. And we do have a lot more to talk about. But Mahoganey, what else do you have to say about that kind of core structure?
What I want to add to that structure is that we aren't saying to discount or to leave yourself open for that extra negotiation that we planners often see. So when they say, well, did it take really 12 hours or did it take 10? Because if it took 10, then I want this. Or if I feel that it's going to take 7 hours, then I want you to bill me for 5 and then bill me for more if it's later. We're not saying get into those conversations. We're saying justify what is in that. I know I was caught in a situation where I had outlined specific hours and the hours were capped no matter what happened. So when I presented that, we were double the amount of hours. So I don't put myself in that position, and I don't like to outline specific hours. However, I will say it does include what I would deem as my minimums within that price frame. Anything above that will allow me to charge for. So my baseline says that it includes these services, regardless of the amount of hours it takes. I know it's only going to take 3 hours for proposal, 5 hours for setup, and all of those types of things. The client doesn't necessarily need to know that specific detail, but we do need to be mindful of what you're charging and where you're starting from.
You're exactly right with that. It's a really good point to kind of catch me on as well too. Not in a bad way, but also too, want to talk about the other way to bill people, and it's a subjective scale, right? The subjective scale means that you're willing to do a job for a dollar amount, right? So you can say, I'll plan your event for $5,000, right? That's a bit too vague. To Mahogany's point, to lean into what she's talking about billing wise, you want to outline how many themes that you'll present, how many floor plans you're willing to work on. 7 revisions to the floor plan. That's reasonable for a trade show. I mean, 7's almost not enough by half, right? Yeah. So if you don't want to present yourself with hour for hour, minute for minute, because the audit of that could be very strenuous, then you can present yourself, your client, with a subjective pricing model, but you still want to outline the duties that are contained herein, because some clients are just not going to be fair about it. And also too, for your own sake, I would advise that if you do a subjective pricing model, you audit your own hours just for your own sake. Because you might realize that your $5,000 a year gig that you work on for 11 months, any 1 month in the 11-month progression, not a lot of work, right? But I will tell you, if you add your hours over those 11 months, you wasted a ton of time with one client that distracted you from other deals. And so you might need to up that price to $6,000. You could say to your client at the end of that season, successful event, everyone's hoorahing, kumbaya in the back room. You could say, hey, when we approach next year, I'm gonna have to increase the pricing. And they go, what? Why? And you say, because I actually spent 128 hours on this one task that I really budgeted about 30 hours for because we did 900 revisions, right? So if you do present a subjective pricing model for services rendered and they're bulkily mentioned in narrative, make sure that you have some system of auditing yourself, because when I kept myself honest as a company, because I have that, over 40 employees now, we were really surprised how much money we were losing on projects. Not technically, because some guys are on salary here, but if you put in their hourly rate, you're shocked how much money you're losing, and it's slipping through the cracks because they spend too much damn time on it, right? So having an audit system is still important to adopt no matter what complexity of your business or how entry level you are, or if you're a one-person team. Even if you're just keeping a little notes file available where you say, I spent about 2 hours on this today, about 2 hours on that today. Keep a little folder away, because I want you guys to fairly get paid for your damn time. And that's one thing that none of us do, especially when you're starting out. You just want to take everything, right? But you need to know your worth. And I have that on my teleprompter notes above me. I have it in all caps, because really I want to make sure you guys understand to know your worth. And that's an interesting thing to talk about too, is that I don't discount things ever. I give them away for free, or I sponsor them because it's a tax write-off. Give them away for free, or we do them for full price. Because if you discount, you undermine your pricing structure, and you also train your client to always expect a discount. That's an opinion. Also, just so we're clear, and I already said it before, all of this is an opinion. It's my opinion, Mahogany's opinion. We are not telling you what to do. We're basing this off people that we know, experience that we've had, and things that we've seen. But none of this is suggesting how to price and model your business. It's just things that we've case studied in little bits and pieces here and there. So Mahogany, based on subjective price modeling, which you embrace, which I totally get, is there anything else to add to that that's a little bit less linear than hour for hour, dollar to dollar? Tell us how to be a successful subjective price modeler.
I like to base it on expectations and also the value. So we didn't talk about what that hourly rate should look like. Sure. But in my humble opinion, I would say that we as planners and producers, I wouldn't expect to have pricing less than $100 to $125 an hour. I also wouldn't expect us to walk through the doors for a certain event without having a base value. And if that base value for you is $5,000, if it's $10,000, that's fine. But make sure that you know what that base value is to be able to take on a project. Definitely.
Now, because I have California-based legal concerns on really going into a dollar amount with you guys, I will not go there, but I think that's fair. But I think that the conceptual point I want to make around exactly what Mahogany just said is about two pricing models. It's fair market value, that's FMV, fair market value, and then it's about perceived value, right? Now, if you want to push yourself to be seen as elite tier, first of all, fair market value, you want to figure out what the baseline standard is to fire you, right? Like if they could hire a full-time employee for 60 grand a year, and it's a client that wants to basically have you on retainer for a variety of events per year, you've got to understand that the fair market value for your position is probably around $75,000 per year. The reason why I got to that number from just saying 60,000 is because it's much cheaper and less liability to employ somebody that's not an employee, right? Now, again, in California, I have additional concerns about that, but let's not go into those particular concerns in my state. Now, let's talk about that. So if you're not having to work compensation, and if you do a layoff or you scale back your workforce, your $60,000 a year person is now worth $75,000. So now you can view that as an hourly rate of how much that you can get. That's your fair market replacement value, if you will. Then you talk about how you want to compete in the higher tier of things. Now, here's an example. We're the agency of record for Topgolf in Las Vegas. And so when I walked into our mid-initial meetings, meaning we were just about to get officially in there, and that's all good. And our client was at the table, and he said, I asked around my friends from New York, my friends from Los Angeles, and my friends from here in Las Vegas. And I go, okay. And I kind of like swallowed hard because I was very nervous what was going to happen next. And he said, the consensus about you is that you're expensive but good. And I was pissed. I was super upset, and I was like, what? Like, what is that? And then we all talked about it internally, and I said, you know what? That's probably the fairest explanation for our service model, because we aren't the cheapest. Even when we know we can do something for the cheapest price, we do not give the client the cheapest price. You know why? Because if we can add value by doing something a little bit better, a little faster, using a nicer substrate, offering a better client experience, I still want to be perceived, again, perceived market value as higher tier. And if you don't trust me that this is accurate, go look at any Supreme product that's Louis Vuitton, right? It makes no sense. It's just expensive because it can be. And the consumer perceives that as being, let's say, nicer or more valuable, right? That perceived value compared to fair market value. In the middle there, you got a teeter-totter between those points about how you want to be perceived in that tier. Now, it can actually hurt you if you underprice your services, because people might go, that's too cheap. Like, why would I don't want a cheap planner. So you might actually lose a job because you underpriced yourself. Because if everybody, let's put it this way. In a 3-bidder process, some of my clients do 5 bids because they can. And you know what they get rid of? the highest and the lowest. Do you know why? Doesn't make sense. Because why are you coming out so much cheaper? Also, why are they coming out so much more expensive? Typically, people think that 3-bidder process is designed to get rid of the highest prices and get the lowest price. I do not think that's true. I work with a ton of broadcast companies, and that's a lot of my business being an experiential marketer here in Los Angeles, and they always demand 3 bids. And I'm always surprised, shockingly, every time I hear this, and it's often, I'm always surprised that they almost never go with the lowest bidder. Just like they almost rarely go with the highest bidder. But certainly the lowest bidder is not attractive to them. They go with usually the best ideas, and they go with the best relationship where they feel the most comfortable with our service base meets their need, right? So for instance, if you're doing a really tech-heavy tour and one firm has a bigger tech background, that's probably the way they're gonna go. If you have a more creative background and you have the badass idea that wins, they go that route. But really pricing from a bidding system is not always really that valid. So make sure you're pricing yourself fairly, because if they choose you, you're just doing free work because you left money on the table. So be really careful with that. So those are a lot about my opinions and my experiences in Topgolf and broadcast. Mahoganey, bring us back to the conference event planner and in just your experience, what you've seen.
I have shared this story many times, and I, to this day, wonder how I actually landed this conference back in, we'll say 2007. I was the lowest bidder. It wasn't government. So normally government, you do win based on lowest contract, but that's not what we're talking about here. So this certain conference had asked for a bid. I actually heard that I had bid a third of what they had paid the planner in the previous year.
That hurts.
And I mean, aside from being ready to throw up when you realize that, I also worked the conference the year before because that planner was, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but needed a second planner to support. And I was essentially, well, what I found out now was shadowing to then take over the conference. But to find out that you're a third of the cost makes you wonder how they only went with me because they knew. And I watched it shift. I watched us have a way higher speaker budget. I watched us have a higher venue cost. I watched us be able to double the value of the boat cruise, all because they took their planner fee and applied it to the enhancements of the event. So yes, it worked out for the attendees, but for me and the amount of hours of work that went into that one conference could have decimated the company.
Right.
If we really want to put it into perspective, it could have really put the company under. Thank God I was that 21-year-old living in the East Coast. So it wasn't too bad.
Now Mahoganey's covered sponsorship.
Completely.
Sponsored event. Yeah. And also too, there is a little bleeding heart discount that I don't mean to belittle. I mean, like when we do nonprofit work, there are some times that I do not want to. Again, I'm still a jerk, I know. I still want to hold my price at my $20,000 producer fee, whatever that might be, right? And that's arbitrary again. But if you have a bleeding heart about that, charge the client your full fee, and then donate $10,000 later. It's a tax write-off. 2, it's a charitable donation. And 3, you then got your fee down to $10,000, but you did not discount, undercut, or undermine your service base. So again, we're harping on this first section. We use up a lot of time to talk about it because that core service base is the nucleus to the whole deal. So now let's talk about what's spinning around outside that nucleus of that whole deal, and that is value-add services. So value-added services we've talked about in a couple different programs previously to this one about adding on things that you can monetize additionally, right? And it could be as simple as, you got a big garage, you got a busy husband, why don't you do the gift bag program? You know, why don't you, if you got a print relationship, why don't you print the programs? Can you do the signage for the convention center? Can you set out all the signage every day? Can you do the hotel negotiations? Hotel negotiations is something that a lot of clients don't always want to do themselves. They want to make sure that you've read the load in and load out, the supervision, the audio-visual contracts, that you've looked at the meals and you've respected gluten-free stuff. So when they walk into the deal, you go, I reviewed this contract. Now it's okay for you to review, because all the uh-ohs and the fact that there's a show loading out in your pre-function hallway during your pre-function, those are things that you as a professional can avoid. Hotel negotiations, in my opinion, that's not a core service. Add that puppy on for $1,000 contract review, to whatever, an hourly fee, whatever you want to do, because that is partnership. And the client might go, holy shit, I didn't know that she could do that as well in addition to her service base. And you know what? I'm busy this month. Let's give that to our principal planner. Let's pay them their fee. And you know what? Hey, boss, can I get $1,000 more to outsource that part? And they go, heck yeah, because they have other things to be worried about. That's when you're leaving money on the table as well from a service-based standpoint, but that should not be included in your service base. Maybe you want to kind of dissect your service base after this conversation that we're having here, because you might find things that work better as a la carte extra billed for items. Some clients don't use it, don't let them use it, but don't give it away for free to the ones that can use it. Charge $500 extra, $1,000 extra. That's a pretty good way to monetize that. So Mahoganey, in regards to add-ons, I like a la carte line itemized pricing for each service base, and that can be subjective, like we talked about, or it could be hourly rate. Talk to us about your ideas for add-on stuff.
I actually like that model and have worked that model for a bit, especially from the hybrid standpoint. And most recently, I'm finding it to be extra favorable in being able to outline the additional services that would normally be covered under event production. I can now itemize a little bit more because now they want to understand what tech is being used, how we're using these things, but it also supports your core purpose as well. I mean, I don't want to discount our site selection companies, that's what they do, full pop, but then they also tell you, we're not doing your food and beverage. Yeah. So you pick and choose kind of those things. But I also feel, especially in this time, it's even, I don't want to say better because it's not necessarily better, but for me and my personal reputation, I find it helpful to be able to increase the a la carte services to maximize my brand.
You're 100% right. And everybody can do it. I don't care what your background is. If you got a background in food and beverage, or you used to be a dope mixologist in college, go right ahead and add that. Maybe some clients go, I don't need that. What are you doing? But other clients might. For instance, I have a consulting vegan chef. And I dragged her around the world with me on events. And the reason why is because sometimes I need better vegan food than your average hotel can put out, because I have a vegan audience, because I've had like Humane Society type clients and that kind of thing. She's great. And she and I travel together sometimes. And it's a great thing to have. But I can add Leslie to my scope because it's our relationship that gets it done. We have a synergy, and we walk into the Four Seasons, as prestigious Four Seasons might be, they're still serving salads for an entree alternative for vegan persons, right? That's not right, you know? So you can add premium add-ons too. If you want mixology for your welcome night and you're a former mixologist because of your fun college years, throw that in there. Let's make some drinks, baby. And maybe it's only $500, but value add, guys. As long as you can be honest with it and do a damn good job, don't feel bad about that, right? Don't put weird stuff in there, like don't watch their pets over the weekend, but you know, be reasonable. So moving into the larger scope of things to tack on, and we talked about this very heavily in strategic partnerships, adding vendors under your umbrella, under your purview, is something that I think is very important. I think that there are a lot of clients out there who don't want to deal with it. They don't want to deal with the audiovisual provider, especially if it's basic conference AV. Some don't want to deal with additional rentals or even speaker fees or speaker travel, green rooms, all that kind of stuff that you guys can monetize. But when you bring in an audiovisual company, that's probably the most obvious go-to, is an audiovisual company. You got to talk about what it costs to do business with that. Now, one thing I want to bring through is this. It's a very, very big point that I think everyone of us always screws up. And that is that when you take care of something for a client, you are legally exposing yourself to risk. You're also playing bank, okay? At that point, in my opinion, if you're not making 5%, you are now losing money. So again, if this vendor is $1,000 and you're not charging $1,050, you are losing money, because I do not believe that $50 premium that you're making on that has anything to do with profit at all. Because realize that your insurance rates are calculated based off your gross income. Realize that you're fronting money to vendors and your client is fronting you money, and there might be terms and conditions and lead times. And what if that client never pays you the final fee? Or what if something happens? You are then exposing yourself to additional risk and liability. Now, a real markup, which should be considered for any vendor that you bring in, a real markup should be on top of 5%. So if your comfort zone is a 10% margin off any vendor you bring in, that's great. But that doesn't mean you need to charge 10%. You charge 15%. Again, subjective opinions, is that between 3 and 6%, you will lose on doing business with anybody. If nothing else, it's a pain in the ass, you know? I mean, if nothing else, right? So I promise you guys that if you are considering the straight pass-through, a literal straight pass-through, you are cutting yourself short because it's not sensible to do that. It's more sensible to make less money per year as a company and just lower your overhead, lower your exposure, and just make less money than taking a $100,000 audiovisual vendor just to pay them $100,000. Doesn't make sense. Mahoganey, how do you feel about the money on the table when you do straight pass-throughs? And then we'll go on to the good stuff here. That was just an unexpected side turn I took.
Well, we did talk about pass-throughs last week, and we did say that the invoices should match in and out. So what I like to say is really just make sure that project management fee that you're tacking on to take care of that, and the management fee of the processing and the relationship building and the management, that is worth something. So just to protect yourself. And again, I mean, like you said, you're the bank, and there is a cost to do that. So
exactly. Now, so beyond that, let's just talk about straight pass-through stuff where we have the vendor partnership. And when they get on site, they have their t-shirts and they have their truck at the loading dock. So you really can't hide all that. We've all white labeled stuff to a degree, but there is some point in the conversation where that's going to break down to a degree of, if you investigated for less than, or for more than, 32 seconds, you find out what's going on. So being transparent with your clients, I think, is paramount in this situation. I think transparency is the critical key to this section of the conversation. We did stress this before with partnerships, but transparency is really the key. And here's why. There are three structures in how you make money off vendors. There's the markup approach, the commission approach, and the agency fee approach. I like the agency fee model, but let's start with the most basic. The markup approach is this. $100,000 AV vendor, you want to make 20% on that, your client sees audiovisual services as a $120,000 section because you made your 20% margin on the $100,000 service, and the client doesn't necessarily know. So if it comes in at $97,000, they do not know that because you just marked it up and you've hidden the vendor's thing. Why I hate that? I don't like it because if your client is a big corporation, on audit, it doesn't look good. I know that most corporations, I know almost every government agency says that you can't do that. They want price transparency or vendor transparency, supplier transparency, whatever you want to call it, but they request that typically in their sourcing agreement. So that's first and foremost, it's entry-level basic stuff that I did when I started my business, and it really worked out poorly, okay? Then the commission approach. The commission approach scares me because it introduces a lot of variables, right? Commission approach means that I introduce Magic AV Inc. to my client. We walk in the meetings together. He's Magic AV, I'm AK Johnston. We shake hands with the client. We both get our checks. Since I brought in Magic AV, they give me a 10% cut of the project after the deal's done. I don't like that because it puts you and the vendor possibly at an odds about payment. And it also puts you and that the vendor and your client directly in communication, which doesn't really have a lot of control. Now, if it's a huge audiovisual thing where you're projection mapping a hotel, put the AV vendor directly in touch because the liability to be rigging stuff and the expense of all that is so high. If one thing goes wrong on that job, you're going to go down and possibly lose a ton of money, right? But if it's basic stuff that goes under your service wing, I don't like the commission model because I've had a lot of planners I know about are marking up and doing commission, and I don't like that. They get it while you're coming, get them while you're going. And the lack of transparency, again, is prevalent in that deal. The agency fee approach is my favorite, right? It's when you take all services under management. That includes your core service. So if your producer fee is $10,000 for ease of math, and my vendors are $10,000, you want to charge a 10% agency fee, I'm of the opinion that's totally fair because it pays you back for playing bank, pays you back for the exposure, the legal risk, the insurance risk, because all the insurance liability is then under your umbrella, under your purview. And it's more people to manage. It's more people on a production timeline, more people on a conference call, more people to wrangle, more cats to herd, right? I'm of the opinion that the agency model is very transparent because if a client ever wants to audit you, you have the vendor invoice and it's exactly 10 grand. And then you've got your invoice, exactly 10 grand. And then you say, and then the bottom line there's where I make my money right there. That's 20%, 10% of the bottom line. That's where you make your money. And if they go, that seems high, then you go, manage it yourself. I don't care. I mean, have fun. But that's my personal approach because I think that really respects everybody, respects the client, respects you. Yeah. But like our base model pricing, you've set up an auditable means for everybody to know exactly what they're getting for exactly how much money. and they know exactly how much money you're making, so they can't throw it in your face later. Mahoganey, have any feelings about the 3 markup, commission, agency fee approaches on billing for you plus service providers?
I feel like I've done them all in the sense of, you try and you see what works best for you. What I did find, to be completely transparent, is that commission I struggle with. I do understand, like I understand a referral fee and things like that, but you're tied to the honesty and the integrity of both sides.
Yeah.
But what if the scope changes? What if it doesn't change? What if the scope increases? Then we start to look at how do we balance that relationship? And then it becomes a different conversation. I do love the idea of an agency model, in the sense of, when I actually opened up in 2004, I was taught that model. I was taught that a basic markup rate was 17% or management fee. And then later on, my mentor actually added we'll call it the aggravation quotient, is what she called it. And she said, bump that management fee up to 20% to make sure it covers all aspects of what the expectations were. I feel like it's a fair model. It's a business model. And I wonder why we fear so much being transparent with it. Because for me, as a client, I would much rather see that it cost me $10,000 for A and it cost me $10,000 for B, and that there was a fee to manage both A and B.
Yep.
One and done.
To put myself in the same boat, or at least the same river, for the first 9 years, same thing. We couldn't fathom the agency model thing, because we also didn't have enough staff at that point. Well, for the first 7 years, not enough staff. When I only had 3 or 4 people full time for my first 5 years, we weren't an agency. So collecting agency didn't necessarily feel very fair, right? And so as an agency now, it's easy for me to speak to that, but I certainly don't mean to challenge anybody. Now, what you could do to easily push back on that, you could charge an administration fee. An administration fee could then be a 15%, a 10%, a 7% flat fee, and the administration of other vendors. 5% is what you were saying, what we used to call the PITA fee, the PITA fee. Sounds nice, looks in the line on, it's pain in the ass fee of coordinating vendors, paying people. And also, your insurance is calculated based off your exposure and risk. I cannot stress this enough, that the more risk and exposure you have, more money you make, the more you're gonna pay, right? So you gotta figure out how to offset that with revenue, right? And if you can't offset with revenue, don't worry about it. Reduce your revenue. If you're not gonna make more money by making more money, reduce the amount of money you're making, because that just exposes you to additional government risks, insurance brokerage risks, all that stuff. It all goes in together. So if you want to charge an administration fee as well as a vendor management fee, I guess you could do that. But maybe an admin fee would be a fairer way to call it. And then once you get to the business where you have an art person, a coordinator, and a secretary, then you can call it an agency fee, because maybe that's a more complete picture of what an agency would provide you with from a toolkit standpoint, right? Does that fairly kind of wrap up your point, as well as my experience in it too, is the same?
It does. And it also, it also speaks to the transparency. I had this conversation even this week on another call, a masterclass we did in the EventPreneur Club. If you're having a service, just like you said, when the AV company pulls out and they're in their own t-shirts and they have their own trolleys with their logo on it, it's no secret with AV company that you're working with. So the fact that people try to hide those things and white label to mark up doesn't make it worth it.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's even vendors too that I have such a good relationship with, that my clients have actually shopped out my vendors before to have them work with them. And usually the client the vendor, will tell them, hey, we actually work exclusively with them on this project because we did it with you guys last year. And it's the most awkward moment for you as a provider, when that vendor goes, hey, I told so-and-so client that, we work with you guys. And so always be fair. If you're too egregious with your markups, it's less nice. And like I've marked vendor stuff up 30 or 40% because they were just too cheap. Or sometimes I know people that were marking up expensive vendors by 40 or 50%. And that just makes everybody mad, because that's just too much money. Like, you can't make more money than they do off their own service. Like, be fair about what you make off of vendors, but don't be foolish, right? So be very cautious in how you tiptoe through that. So another thing I said was offsetting these concerns. So you have now your admin fee. I think that's a better way of describing it for most of our audience here. Got your admin fee settled. Let's call it a nice 10% number. So it's nice. It's modest, but it covers your 5% to do business and a little 5% on the back end while still being competitive. One thing that I like to do, insurance for me is a big deal. I'm about $200,000 a year in insurance is what I spend. And that's a lot because I have a fabrication shop, a print shop, a production company, as well as the agency, which is the art department, the designers, the producers all in the office. It's a lot of people, a lot more exposure. We actually do charge a percentage of service for an insurance fee, an insurance subsidy. And that's because general liability insurance exists whenever we go on site. You do it for a site visit, general liability. You send trucks out, general liability. Ladder, general liability. Anybody goes on somebody's property, general liability. So we charge an insurance subsidy. It's only 1.5%. So a lot of people don't argue with it. So on a $100,000 job, $1,500. Now your average job is $10,000, let's call it. It's nominal, right? But at the end of the freaking year, that recoups so much of that $200,000, you'd be shocked to leave on the table. And I was shocked because I told my accounting team who wanted to roll this out, I said, clients are going to argue about this. But clients catch themselves being cheap by not asking because they go, what is 1.5%? And they end up paying it. Only about, out of 400 jobs per year, maybe 2 complain about it in a whole year. I tell you guys, if you charge about 1 to 2% for insurance just to recoup that, and it's justifiable. Don't make money on insurance, please. That's just rude, right? But try to get it subsidized. So if you're paying $10,000 a year in insurance, if you can collect back $6,000 in an insurance subsidy by charging 1% of your bottom line, again, your insurance risk is calculated off of your gross revenue. So the more you increase that, the more your insurance costs per year go up. Just charge 1%, baby. And you have your admin fee of 10, you've got your insurance subsidy of 1%. Now you're 11% better than you were off before you joined us on this episode 7 of The Art of Profitable Entertaining with Austin Johnston, Mahoganey Jones. Anyway, Mahoganey, anything on that, on the insurance thing?
I actually never heard it described that way, so I actually take that advice as well. I always put it in the base fee, and that's how I got taught when I first opened, is you calculate it based on your, what does it cost you to step in the door?
Right.
So that's an interesting way to look at it as well. I will bring it up with the accountant.
and again, price modeling for our audience. Price modeling is all about giving you guys an idea for what's happening in the industry, not telling you how to do it. Mahoganey, hearing about it is not uncommon. Me doing it is not uncommon. It's a matter of what you feel like fits your business the best, as well as that 3% is a reasonable fee for your exposure. If you're in an area where you're very exposed to risk, I know that people in New York have a hell of a time, in Manhattan proper, have a hell of a time producing things safely. And I mean, it's kind of crazy because whenever we do an event in West Hollywood or in Manhattan, we actually have to build in an extra slush fund for parking tickets for our trucks, as well as tunnel fees. I know we had bridge and tunnel fees for a show we just did in Manhattan, and my bridge and tunnel fees were over $2,000 in bridge and tunnel fees. Talk about anybody who's ever parked staff at a convention center for $40 a day. These are the anomalies of life where you should start having subsidies and not eating stuff. Stop eating stuff, guys, but also don't ruin your client on that. I know we had activation-based parking at staff at trade show booth. I believe we hit $4,000 or $5,000 for a pretty modest trade show with a pretty modest staff, but it just added up over the course of load in, live to load out, and shift changes. Oh, wow. If you're going to eat $4,000 on, let's say, a $5,000 scope, that's a big old chunk. And I don't think that's a good idea. But don't hit your client with that afterwards. Set up an expectation that you expect to be reimbursed for those costs, just like insurance, and figure out how to fairly monetize and subsidize or subsidize some of those costs, right?
Yeah.
Mahoganey, on that one?
I was going to say that is actually a line item on mine. All expenses. I mean, that was, you only need to get burned one time on that one. So
yeah.
Really quick that you cannot take that $4,000 bill for parking, moving, loading, those things.
Yeah. This is probably the one section where I might say that you could lose that 5% fee for whatever by just providing them with the actual parking vouchers that say that it amounts to $4,000, because it's better to recoup 95% of that than it is to recoup 0. And I'd imagine that a lot of you made the same mistakes that I did when I started, and that was that I never recouped it. I was like, it's the cost of doing business. It's like, no, it's not. It's the cost of them doing business in their damn convention center, not for you to eat, right? Because it's too much money, right? But not making any percentage margin on that, I think is reasonable. Just like I don't make a lot of money on flights. My team on Delta, we got some points for it. So wash out your 5% banking fee within the points that you get for when you and your hubby go to Hawaii, Put it out to that. But reality strikes, collect something for your work done, and make sure you don't leave that kind of money on the table, because clients usually expect it. Like Mahoganey said when she underpriced herself, sometimes clients just aren't being upfront that every other vendor they've ever worked with has always charged them for that stuff. So don't give them a break on that. I mean, don't rip them off, but don't give them a break. That brings us to credit card fees. So a lot of people have feelings about charging for credit card processing. I have a lot of feelings about it. I have a lot of feelings in California because they made it illegal for you to do. They made it actually a crime to charge credit card fees. So a lot of people were using the verbiage of at the bottom of an invoice, it says, this price reflects a cash discount price. If credit card is to be used, a 3% premium will be charged on top. So basically, they're using the opposite of a discount. They're using a markup structure and saying that the invoice amount, so your $10,000 fee, is actually the cash discount price to do a check, bank wire, or I guess cash at that point too. Then I went to go get government permits, like to actually permit an event, and the government permit website charges a credit card fee. So I found that fascinating, that our government can charge a credit card fee, but I can't. So, it's technically legal, illegal, be careful about it, but I do think that, again, you should offset the eating of credit card fees. Now, the bigger conversation here is, especially during COVID, should you offer to take credit cards? And my answer here is yes. I think that a lot of people think that banks are more secure than credit cards. They're not. I have had fraudulent checks sent to me before, and my bank said that they legally have, in the United States, that JP Morgan Chase said that they actually have 6 months to reject a check without my notice. So I always thought credit cards were less secure because people could call and dispute a charge. The reality is your bank is the same dang thing. So I think because consumer flexibility is going to be more limited moving forward for the next 2 years during a recession, I think offering credit card payments is important. I do not think you should eat the fees on that. That's my feeling about credit cards and credit card fees, but I think it's an added piece of flexibility that's going to ensure that you can get and capture a client's business, and clients don't want to awkwardly tell you that they're broke. Offering credit card payments is a way to give them an out and let them overfinance their life because you deserve to get paid for your work performed.
Yeah.
Let them choose that, but don't, I guess, try to offer it. If you don't want to offer it, offer a service like a PayPal or a Square where you can offer online payments. It can put the fees on them as the sender of payments, and it doesn't require you to have a credit card terminal. We certainly don't, and we run 6 figures of credit card payments, maybe even 7 figures of credit card payments. Like we run over $1 million a year in credit cards, and we don't even eat a fee, and we don't have a terminal. Never have. That's my opinion about it.
I mean, I've gone back and forth on that many times, and it was only, and this is going to date me, when you start seeing the event registration site that started to allow you to put the feedback on the purchaser.
Yep.
Was the first time I was like, oh, wait a second, maybe I should look at whether or not that is added to the invoice or not. Sure. I always viewed it as it's the cost of doing business, and not how I take the payment. But being in Canada with a 75% client base being the US, the exchange, credit card fee, and all of the above is a lot.
Right. So let's actually, really good pause point, because we only have a couple more terms to go into here, but a quick pause point is we just found 3%, at least 3% for your cost of actually doing business. We found, let's call it 2% because of insurance subsidies. Now you're going to have to use a credit card for 2.2% at minimum, right? Maybe even 3% for like an American Express or something of that nature, right? We've already found you guys between 6 and 10% where you're already bleeding out in your margins, and your clients probably expected to pay that, right? So let's just stop there and just say we've already found you guys some money in those margins. So let's just keep moving forward on that. But ultimately, don't eat those fees. If a client pushes back on you, you can choose to eat them at that point. But if you propose them and they don't question it, ding dong, you left money on the table for years, right? So that's a pretty good fact check for you. So, and if you're not sure, talk to your client about it. You must have a client that's close enough to you to be like, hey, Susan, if I started charging for this, that, and the other, would that be industry practice in your opinion? And they probably go, yeah, and you'll be shocked how casual they'll answer that too, because you'll be like, holy crap, I could have been charging 8% premium on everything I've ever done. And it's crazy, it's a lot of money. So that's important. So in our closing section here, we're gonna talk about payment terms, which everyone wants to know, and then also drama when stuff doesn't go really well. And we're gonna wrap this up in 10 minutes, and I promise not to talk too much faster than I already do. So deposits, what to collect up front. I'm of the opinion that 50% up front gets you engaged. Doesn't work for everybody, but making sure that you have a significant portion of upfront to make sure that you're engaged. Now, if you're 12 months out from a program, 50% payment up front is pretty heavy, right? So you're gonna modify those terms. Now, if getting upfront payments is difficult, and again, we're not here to start tracking deposits and payments, but again, I think you guys should be collecting a big chunk before you show up on site, first and foremost. And secondly, deposit payments in exchange for a letter of intent, an LOI. If you're real far out from an opportunity, a letter of intent can allow you to start working on planning, attend some meetings, make some floor plans, and guarantees that if they don't hire you or they cancel the event, that you'll recoup like $5,000 or $2,000, right, in planning fees, right? A letter of intent merely says that that client intends to use you for these services, and they're gonna probably cost $20,000 later, but for now, you will settle for $2,000 if they kill it. If they don't kill it, that $2,000 acts as a deposit. So it gives them confidence because now you're legally engaged and working. So you're not giving away your work product. For instance, I just attended 3 phone meetings for a client, and the second one, they awarded me the business verbally, right? And I said, great, we'll send you an LOI. And they were like, huh, what do you mean? And I said, yeah, before we attend any more meetings, here's the LOI just saying that we're gonna do business together. We're gonna do business for about $100,000 later, but that's not important. The LOI puts you on the hook for $5,000. That way I can attend the next 3 or 4 months of meetings for free on my time before we have a full scope decided upon. But the LOI is a nice, softer way of being like, are you serious? Because I'm serious, and I'll attend your meeting seriously, but you got to be serious. You owe me a signature. And upon that signature, you can put in there, a lot of our LOIs are cushy. Like they owe us the money within 60 days, or I even have sent an LOI that says within 30 days of request, meaning they never actually pay us. But we get that signature as the signed check, basically. I take that LOI back, I hold on to it, and that way, if they ever cancel it or it gets bad, I can say, you know what? I'd like to collect the LOI payment. Here's the invoice for that $5,000. We're done, And that allows you to compensate for the work that's been performed. So Mahoganey, I think deposits are the most scandalous, and LOI might be new language for some of these people as well too. It's really good language too, and it is kind of expected by some people. And I don't really want to go into payments too much because that follows your scope of work and what you're doing. What are your feelings on payment terms?
I'm a firm believer too of the 25 to 50% upfront. Depending on time. If your event is happening, I've been looking at this more now. If the event is happening within, we'll say less than 3 months, I expect full payment. I'm not going to, and I know I might be different compared to others, but I also no longer want to go into a situation where I'm expecting payment after the event, where a lot of things can kind of change and switch in scope and retrospect. So my payment terms are pretty straightforward: 50% upfront, depending on the time frame, 25%, like you said, too, if we're looking at 6 months to further out. But final payment is always due 30 days before the event.
That's incredible, and certainly unique in certain markets to get that final payment within 30 days. I know wedding planners are in a similar boat for how they bill, whereas in the corporate world, we're always on the hook for, I would say, 10 to 50% is carried between 15 and net 60. Broadcast studios, I got to carry about half for about 60 days. It's pretty rough because you are then officially planning. So that's important. Now, let's go into the, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I will say, though, if you're looking at government and certain contracts, obviously we do have to follow their payment terms. So yes, we do get payment after the fact in that 60 days. But whenever possible, and usually
whenever possible.
and I say this because when in my personal opinion, when I'm working with corporate clients, they're prepared to pay in advance, and the only thing that's paid after are expenses that are incurred.
Yes, very fair. That's a very fair way of billing too.
Yeah.
So now this leads us to that client that you had a carry balance with or what have you, and we talk about late fees. Now, one legality thing that from a California, maybe United States perspective, I want to be very clear about my knowledge about this fact, is that late fees cannot be calculated later. So in your language, make sure that you outline the percentage of late fee that you're willing to charge. Typical industry standpoint is between 1% and 5% compounded monthly is a range that you can kind of dabble in, okay? So be very cautious about charging late fees later because they're not enforceable necessarily, right? So our contracts say that all late payments are subject to an X amount of dollar percentage late fee. Again, like I told you, industry standard between 1% and 5%. Not a whole lot of conversation on that, Mahoganey, right? It's a pretty simple fact. Cool. Be sure it's in the upfront part of the contract phases, not on the back end of, hey, you're already late. By the way, you owe me late fees. Can't do that. Maybe you can. Maybe they will pay it, but it's not enforceable. Okay. Now, communication.
If there's no conversation before it happens, then it's not open for negotiation. So.
No. So then we're talking about it's not going well with you and that client. You're already in the late fee stage. We talk about mediation and communication. I said mediation is a legal term, but communication is really everything. It's like, hey, girl, you got to cut that check today. Check's in the mail. Well, at any one time I have, a couple of these on my books, only because our volume's so high, whatever. But certainly right now, because of COVID, we have a few. And communication for me is key because it makes me feel respected. Even when people owe me money, if they keep talking to me, I accept really stupid payment terms. Like up front, I would have never agreed to 14 months to pay me with no interest, but I'm flexible, on the back end. That's why you can't be flexible on the front end on how your contract reads because it'll force you to be flexible on the back end if you were too flexible in the front. So again, communication is everything. If communication drops off consistently, just know you're in trouble. Then it becomes a mediation thing of basically let's figure this out, right? Now, everything is a conversation until people stop talking. I want you to just think about that with everything in your life, from negotiating contract to meeting space to even just meeting new clients. Yeah. Everything is a conversation until one side stops talking. And that's how, what if you owe somebody money? Let's talk about that for a second. Communicate. If you say, I am broke as hell and I can't pay you for 2 months, that's fine by me. But if you stop responding to me, that's what escalates me personally. That escalates me to a bad place. And that leads to collections. Now, collections, again, United States perspective, not just California, but I know this, that you have to wait 60 days after billing a client. And I would suggest going multiple ways of billing, email and paper billing, or something that's repetitive, if you will, to bill them. Yeah. Once you get 60 days out from your original due date, then you can hire a collections agency. But I want to remind you that a collections agency is merely a really bad, really cheap paralegal attorney that's hired for no money to collect that money for both of your mutual benefit. Now, if anything I said to you leading up to that validation of a collections agency scared you and sounded bad, it's meant to, because reality strikes that your debt is only as good as their award, right? So if they're going to take 30%, typical industry standpoint, 30%, and you're looking to collect $2,000, which I did this years ago when I was pretty broke and I needed to collect my $2,000, no collections agency would help me. And they all didn't do much work because all I could do is basically robo-dial them to death, and I officially had filed collections. It's good for you because it adds pressure. It applies pressure because it will damage their credit, because a collections agency can legally damage their credit. So that applies additional pressure, which can be effective. That's good. And you're also not paying money to do that, right? Yeah. And then, of course, the last option is going to be a lawsuit where you actually hire an attorney. Now, filing a small claims lawsuit in California, United States, is going to be about $27, and you can do yourself. Very, very cheap to do. But then you got to somebody that's like $80. Then you got to show up to court, and you got to file the stuff properly. It becomes challenging. And the biggest thing I'll remind you with, and we're going to end on a high note because I have 1 minute left to end on a high note here, but is that don't sue somebody that doesn't have money unless you don't expect money back and out of it, right? If the client is flat broke, you might just have to walk away and write it off. And at that point, talk to your accounting person immediately, because that write-off is not all done in vain. You can write that off against your taxes very, very cleanly. And I believe that extends to Canada as well too, because that is I ate it, I shouldn't have eaten it, and it was bad. And you can put that against your taxes so that you're not paying for the income against that, that non-payment, if you will. So Mahoganey, that's a big old wrapping note. I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to end on time.
Yes.
How can we end with people on a really positive note So they're pricing stuff, so they're making some money. Let's end on a good note.
My main point of advice is that, yes, we are in a different and unprecedented time, but people are still buying services. Please do not discount because you are worried about what the other person can handle. Price your services, know your worth, no discount because you're worried about them. You too have to eat, and there is nothing wrong with success remorse and being successful.
Absolutely. And don't forget, if you are a bleeding hearts person, you cannot pour from an empty cup. It's just not possible. So make sure you take care of yourself, take care of your business, because that will take care of yourself as well too. And thanks for joining us again on a Tuesday. Had a great time, and please engage with us so we can know what we want to talk about next week when we go live at 4 p.m. Eastern, just like this. And we're going to also record all these sessions, edit them down a little bit more concise, a little more fast, so that you guys can reference the content and share it in the future. Mahoganey, with that, we're out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.